Nora Bligh had until noon to choose which of two papers to sign. The first put Tobias in her aunt's house in Bristol, under her aunt's name, fed and schooled, and sent Nora into service 4 counties away. The second took the old cold bath at Nether Tallow off the parish books and made her answerable for £11 of arrears she did not have. Mr. Slade had explained the sensible one twice. She signed the second and carried her son out of the vestry room before anyone could argue. The bathhouse had been shut since before she was born. Slates gone off the north pitch. The changing rooms full of nettles. Below, the plunge chamber held 4 feet of standing water. That night she made a bed for Tobias on dry boards near the cold stove and went down with a rushlight to see how bad the flooding was. The water took her boots to the ankle. It was not cold. Her father had sunk wells for 30 years. He had taught her what water should feel like in November, and this felt like July. She held the light closer. Something under the surface had been laid by hand. She did not go in after it. A woman alone at 9 at night, in 4 feet of water she could not see the bottom of, with a child asleep upstairs. She had done that arithmetic on the second step and turned round. But she knelt on the bottom stair with her sleeve in the wet and got 2 fingers on it. It was dressed, squared. There was a joint under her hand, and the joint was tight. Somebody had built something down there. Then the water had come up over it, and everybody had gone home. She sat on the stair a long time after the rushlight went out. Her aunt's letter was still in her pocket. Keziah Vellacott wrote a good hand, and did not waste it. The boy would be called Vellacott. That was the whole of it. In 1 line. In the middle of a page of kindness. He would be schooled, and put to a trade, and want for nothing. He would not be a Bligh. A Bligh in Bristol was a nobody's child out of a Somerset village whose father had fallen off a withy stack drunk. Jem had not been drunk. He had been 41 and tired, and it had rained for 9 days. Nora had said that at the time to about 11 people and had stopped saying it, because there is no way to say it that does not sound like a wife. Slade had put the 2 papers side by side on the vestry table that morning, squared up, the way a man does when he wants a room to see he is being fair. You've no trade, Mrs. Bligh. I've my father's. You have your father's trade the way a parson's daughter has divinity. He said it kindly. That was the thing about Cuthbert Slade. He was never once unkind, and it did not help at all. Who in this parish will pay a woman to sink a well? Nobody yet. Nobody yet. He turned the first paper a half-inch towards her. Bristol. School. A name that opens a door. And you would see him. How often? He did not answer that, which was the only honest thing in the conversation. She looked at the second paper for a while. £11. Land tax and highway rate, 9 years of it, on a building the township had carried since 1857 and wanted off its books before the audit. If I take it, what happens to the £11? It follows you. £2 a year and interest. And the vestry will not be generous about it. And what happens to the boy's name? Slade looked at her then, properly, for the first time. Nothing, he said. Nothing happens to the boy's name. She signed with the clerk's pen, and her hand was steady. She was pleased about that for years afterwards, because nothing else about her was. The walk out to Nether Tallow was 1 3/4 miles with a handcart. Tobias was 8, and carried the kettle so that he had a job. The old cold bath sat where the lane dropped into the combe, back against the hill. A long, low building of Has stone, with the slate gone at the north end. There was a pump house on the end with no pump in it, and a date panel over the door. She stopped in front of the door, with the cart handles still in her hands, and looked at the panel longer than a person ought to look at a stone. It was set crooked. Not much. Half an inch out of level over 3 feet. Dropped at the left. Her father had a saying about that, and she could hear him saying it. A stone over a door is the last thing a man does and the first thing anybody sees. Said it true, or don't set it. What's the matter? Tobias said. Nothing, said Nora. Somebody put that back in a hurry. That's all. By the end of the first week, she had a rule about the water, and by the end of the third, she had a problem. The rule was simple. She marked the plunge with a nail scratch at the level she found it, and she looked at it every morning before she did anything else. It never moved. 4 feet and a hand's breadth. Through a wet fortnight when the lane ran like a gutter. Through a hard frost at the turn of the year when every butt in Tallow Bridge froze solid. The same mark, morning after morning, and she could not find one thing feeding it. The feed pipe was there. A 4-inch earthenware run came in through the west wall above the water line. She got her arm up it to the shoulder. It was dry as a bone and had been dry long enough to have a mouse's nest in it. So the plunge was not filling from the pipe. It was filling from underneath. And it was stopping at a level somebody had decided on. Water does not decide on a level. It finds one. If it stops in the same place in flood and in frost, there is a thing under it, holding it there. She wrote that in the back of her father's boring book, on the first clean page after his last entry. His last entry was dated April 1863, in a hand that had already begun to shake. November went on fuel and the roof, and neither went well. There was gorse on the hill and dead elm in the hedge, and no coal she could pay for. Gorse burns like a shout, and is gone. Tobias got a cough in the second week, and she listened to it across the room for 11 nights. She had £1.14 when she signed, and 11 shillings by Christmas. The village made up its mind about her at roughly the same rate. Tacey Hereford kept the shop and served her civilly and gave no credit, which was fair. Amos Purnell was sexton and had opinions. He told 2 men at the forge that the old cold bath had never done anybody any good and had done one person a great deal of harm. Some places, he said, are best left shut. Nora heard it third hand and did not go and ask him what he meant. She was sorry afterwards that she had waited 8 months to do it. Job Yandell was the first person in that parish to walk up her lane on purpose. He was over 70 and made hurdles. He came on a Sunday with 3 withy bonds under his arm, as though a man might happen to be passing a building at the end of a dead lane. You'll want them nettles out of the changing rooms afore spring. I'll want a good deal before spring. Aye. He looked at the north pitch where the slates were off. That were a fine house once. My mother took the water for her knees, 2pence, and a towel. When did it shut? 41. He said it the way you say a year everybody knows. Spring failed. Springs don't fail. Job Yandell looked at her sideways. Well, he said. That one did. She went down to the plunge that night and stood on the bottom stair and looked at the flat black water at 4 feet and a hand's breadth. A spring that failed in 1841 would have left a dry hole. This building had stood shut for 25 years, with 4 feet of water in it that nobody could account for. The parish had gone on paying rate on it. Not one soul had ever taken a light down those steps to ask why. That was not stupidity. She thought about it for a long time and decided it was not stupidity. Everybody had been told the answer in 1841. Once a parish has been told an answer, it stops seeing the question. In February, she got up a ladder with her father's level and laid it on the date panel, 1/2 inch out over 3 feet, dropped at the left. She had that much right from the ground. What she had not seen from the ground was the mortar. The panel was set in has like the rest of the front. The joint round it was a different color and a different sand. It stood a little proud, and it had been struck with a thumb instead of a tool. Somebody had taken that stone out and put it back. She sat on the ladder in the cold with her hand flat on it and read what was cut there, which she had read 40 times. Erected by subscription, MDCCCI. Nothing else. No verse, and no name, which was strange in itself. In her experience, the men who put up a building like that put their names on it, and put them large. The well at Ranscombe Farm had been bored, blasted, argued about, and given up on. In March it fell to Nora, because everybody else had already had a turn. Farmer Guppy did not want her. He said so on his own doorstep, with his hat on. I've had 2 gangs at that hole and 18 pound in it. I know. That's why you'll try me. Because you're cheap? Because I'm last, Nora said. You've nobody after me but the water cart. Guppy chewed on that. He was not a pleasant man, and he was not a fool. What's your price? 4 shillings a day while I'm in it. Nothing. If it don't come. Nothing? Nothing. You've had 2 men take your money and leave you a hole. You'll not have a third. It was the only offer she could make. And it was a very stupid one. And she knew that while she was saying it. The hole was 34 feet and dry, stined for the first 12 and raw below. She spent the whole of the first day at the top of it doing nothing that looked like work. She went through the spoil heaps. Nobody had thought them worth keeping, and they were still there because nobody had thought them worth carting either. She sorted them by color with her hands and laid them along a plank in the order she believed they had come out. Guppy came and watched her do it, and went away, and came back. That's my dirt. It's your well telling you what's under it, said Nora. And 2 gangs have walked over it in their boots. Her father's rule was that a hole is a book, and the spoil is the pages. A man who throws his spoil about tears the pages out, and then complains he cannot read. By evening she had it. The last 4 feet out of that hole was a hard blue-gray marl. And marl like that does not sit on top of water. It sits on top of more marl. Whoever sank it had gone down in the wrong place by about 90 feet of ground. She walked the field for 3 hours the next morning, where the rushes grew, where the frost went off first, where a molehill threw up wet dirt on a dry slope. Then she put a peg in and told Guppy to sink there. That's in my gateway. It's in the corner of your gateway. And you can move a gate. They struck water at 19 feet on the 4th day. She stined it herself to 18 with brick and lime that Guppy bought and grumbled about. Up from a curb, working in a foot of water with her sleeves off. 2 courses an hour, and no more. A well-stined fast is a well-stined twice. Guppy paid her 4 shillings a day for 11 days and 3 pounds for the stining. He never once said she had done well, and he told everybody in Tallow Bridge that he had found the spot himself. That was all right. Nora had watched him watching her lay out the spoil. And men talk. Wilmot Chedzoy came up to the old cold bath in April with a shovel over his shoulder. He was about 40, slow-spoken, and he had worked 6 years for her father before her father got too shaky to hold a rod. Guppy's telling folk he found that water. I know. He's telling it in the Ring of Bells, and there's 4 men in there knows he couldn't find water in a bucket. Wilmot set the shovel down. There's a well wanted at Cutcombe and one at Poulet's. I can't sink. I can dig and I can turn a windlass all day. I've a strong back and no head for it. You've the head and no back. I've a back. You've a back that has to carry a boy and all, he said. And I've said my say. They took the Cutcombe well in May and the Poulet well in June, and split it 3 parts to 2 in her favor. He proposed that. She argued him down to 3 and 2.5, and neither of them ever mentioned it again. By midsummer 1867, she had 6 pounds, 9 in a tin, the north pitch reslated as far as the second purlin, and a trade. She also had a name in the parish, which is not the same as being liked. When Amos Purnell went past the end of her lane, he went past on the far side. Once, in June, she heard him say the word pring. She had never heard it before. She turned round in the road, and he was already 20 yards off, and she let him go. She bored her own ground in July, 3 holes, and paid for it in candles and Sundays. Her father's rods were 42 feet of wrought iron in 6-foot lengths with a shell auger on the bottom. They had been in a bag under her bed since Bristol. Wilmot turned the brace. She read the spoil, foot by foot, and wrote every foot down. The first hole went in the field above the building. 9 feet of head, then rubbly lias, then rock at 22. The second went in the yard, and gave the same. Near enough. The third she put 4 feet from the north wall of the pump house. At 11 feet the auger came up empty and turned freely, and Wilmot said a word he did not usually say in front of her. "That's a hole. That's a made hole," said Nora. "Bring it up slow." The rods dropped clear for another 9 feet, then met rubble. Loose rubble that took the auger and would not fill it. She sat on the grass with the log in her lap and worked it out. There was a shaft beside the pump house. Somebody had sunk it and lined it and used it. Somebody else had thrown rubble down it. The rubble started at 20 feet, which meant the top 20 feet of that shaft was open air with a lid on it, somewhere under the grass. She found the lid in 2 hours with a bar. A flat lias cap 4 feet across, 18 inches under the turf, with a lifting hole, plugged by a stone, 20 feet of steined shaft, dry, going down into the dark, and a choke of rubble at the bottom of it. She did not go down that day. She went down the following Sunday with Wilmot on the windlass, in daylight, rope doubled, with a candle. She came up after 9 minutes because the air went bad below 15. And she was not going to be the woman found dead in a hole she had opened herself. She saw the steining on the way down, and it stopped her breath more than the air did. It was beautiful work. 9-inch curved brick, laid dry, coursed so true that in 20 feet she could not find a joint out of line. Her father had steined for 30 years and could not have laid that. At 16 feet a course had been cut away and a stone let in, and there was lettering on the stone. E. Pring sunk this 1,801. She hung on the rope and looked at it until Wilmot shouted down to ask if she was breathing. The parish register at Tallow Bridge had the prings all through it from 1,740 onward, and then stopped having them after 1841. Elias Pring, well sinker, buried 1,836. Susanna Pring, daughter of the above. No burial, no marriage, nothing after her father's. Nora took that to Job Yandel, because Job Yandel had been alive. He was cutting withies, and went on cutting them for a while after she asked, "Suki Pring," he said at last, "you've been in that shaft." "I've been 20 feet of it." "Then don't go no further, maid." "Why?" "Because I'm 74 and I'd sooner not have to say it." He straightened up. "She kept the bath after her father. Woman sinker. Same as you. And folk was used to it on account of him. Then in 41 the spring went bad. Went thick, then went muddy. Then went to knout in about 10 days. And she went about the parish saying it had been turned. Said somebody had sunk on the barrow ground above and cut into her water and took it off her. Had they? There were a sinking on barrow ground that year. There's always a sinking somewhere. Job put the hook down. Old Slade were agent then. Jarvis Slade. This one's father. And then they found a barrel of lime in her shaft. She went to sessions at Wells for fouling the well herself, and got 3 months, and that were the end of the prings in this parish. Nora stood in the withy bed with her hands cold in July. Did you believe it? I were 48, and my rent came off the estate, said Job Yandel. I believed what were handy. She walked home the long way to have the time. A spring that goes thick, then muddy, then dry in 10 days is not a spring that fails. It is a spring being emptied through somebody else's hole. And a woman who says so, in a parish where the agent's man did the sinking, gets a barrel of lime found in her shaft. Nora had 11 pounds owing, a boy of 8 asleep in a building nobody wanted, and a trade she could only work 6 months of the year. She went up the ladder that evening, put her hand on the crooked date panel, and stood there in the last of the light. She cleared 11 feet of the choke in September, and it cost her the whole of the season's money. You cannot dig a shaft out from the top with 1 woman and 1 man on a windlass. You need air and light and timber, and somebody to send for if it goes wrong. She hired a third man for 8 days. She bought 2 loads of scaffold poles, a canvas air pipe, and a stove to draw it. By the end of the month, 6 pounds 9 had become 1 pound 1, and she had a hole 11 feet deeper. Tobias worked the tally. She would not let him near the windlass. He sat at the head with a slate and marked every bucket, and told her the number at the end of the day, and she wrote it in the book against the depth. Rubble that comes out fast is rubble somebody threw in. Rubble that comes out slow is rubble that fell. It came out fast all the way. Every bucket of it. Nobody's roof had collapsed into that shaft. Somebody had stood at the top of it with a barrow. At 28 feet, she found the bottle. It was in the steining, not the fill. A course of brick had been eased out and put back, and behind it stood a stone gin bottle with a wooden stopper waxed over. Inside it, dry, was about 4 ounces of ground-up spoil. There was a paper tied round the neck with wax thread. The writing had gone brown, but it had not gone. Barrow Geed sinking. Spoil at 58 feet. Taken 3rd June, 1841. S. Pring. Nora came up with it inside her coat, sat down on the grass in the sun, and said nothing to Wilmot for about 2 minutes. "What is it?" "It's dirt," she said. "It's dirt out of somebody else's hole." And she went and got it. She took the stopper out that night on the table with a candle at each side and tipped a little into her hand. Blue-gray. Hard. She wet it and worked it between finger and thumb, and it went to a smooth paste with no grit in it at all. Then she read the 3rd page of her own boring log again. There was no such stratum anywhere under Nether Tallow. Not at 11 feet, not at 20, not at 42. Her ground was head, then rubbly lias, then rock. Whatever Suki Pring had gone up onto Barrow ground for in June of 1841, she had come back with a fistful of ground that could not have come out of her own well. So when the water at the old cold bath ran thick and blue-gray that summer, anybody with eyes and a bottle could have known where the mud came from. Nora sat with her hands flat on the table on either side of the little heap of dirt. She had a bottle and a label. She had no journal, no plan, no deed, and no idea whether a court in Somerset had ever cared what color a piece of dirt was. Below 28 feet the choke went on. She had 1 pound 1, and it was October. She had come up against the thing every sinker comes up against, and her father had a word for it, which was ground. You can be right about where the water is and still not be able to afford to reach it. Slade came out to Nether Tallow on the 11th of October in a dog cart, alone, and left it at the gate and walked up. He looked at the shaft head, and the poles, and the canvas pipe, and the stove, and the boy sitting on an upturned bucket with a slate. "You have been busy," he said. "I have. May I ask what you are looking for?" "My water." Cuthbert Slade nodded slowly, as though she had said something reasonable about the weather. He was 48, graying, very neat, and he had the trick of standing still. "Mrs. Bligh, there is a syndicate at Wells that means to build a paper mill in this valley. Fine paper wants a great deal of water. It wants it clean, and it wants it the same temperature all the year." He looked down the shaft, not at her. "There is one supply in this parish that answers. They have asked me to buy this building." "How much?" £140. Nora had not expected a figure that size, and it went through her like cold water. "And the £11? Gone. And there is one other thing. I will say it once, and then I will go, because I do not want you to think I am standing here pressing you." He turned and looked at her properly. "The mill will want a clerk in 4 years. A boy of 12, schooled at the mill's charge, articled at 16, a man with a trade at 21. I can put your son's name down on Monday. It is not a favor I have invented to trap you. It is what the mill will do for 4 boys in this valley, and I have the giving of the 4. He went down the lane, got into the dog cart, and drove away. And Nora stood at the shaft head for a long time, with the boy still marking his slate. £140 was not the difficult part. The difficult part was that Slade had not offered her son a way out of the valley. He had offered him a way to stay in it. Schooled at 12. Articled at 16. A trade at 21. And his own name on the end of it. Bligh. In a mill office. In the parish his father had died in. It was the exact thing she had refused in the vestry in November, handed back to her the right way round. She did the arithmetic that night, the way she did all of it. Out loud. In the boring book. In columns. Against taking it. A bottle of dirt, with a dead woman's name on it. A shaft she could not afford to clear. A stratum on a piece of paper. For taking it. £11 gone. 140 in the tin. A roof. 2 winters of not being frightened. A boy who would never have to find out whether his mother could sink a well in February. She sat with the pen over the page and could not make the columns come out the way she wanted, and that was because they did not. So she stopped doing sums and asked herself the question her father used to ask when a farmer wanted a well in the wrong place. What does the man want it for? Slade wanted the building. He did not want the water in the plunge, because 4 feet of standing water is no use to anybody. He wanted what was under the choke. He wanted it badly enough to put £140 and a boy's future on the table, for a ruin the parish had spent 9 years trying to give away. So the water was still there. Somewhere under 28 feet of somebody's barrow work, the spring that failed in 1841 was still running. Slade knew it, and had known it before he ever came up the lane. And if she sold to him, he would clear that shaft with 8 men in a fortnight and pipe it to a mill. The parish would go on believing Suki Pring had put a barrel of lime in her own well. Nora wrote her answer on the Sunday and walked it into Wells herself on the Monday, rather than trust it to anybody. She wrote that she would not sell. She wrote that she was obliged to him for the boy and could not take it. She would not have her son fetched up under a favor she had bought with a lie. If the mill wanted its 4 boys, it might have the offer back for somebody else's. She was not proud of the letter afterwards. It was 4 lines longer than it needed to be, and one of the lines was for herself. Tobias asked her about it in December, because a child hears things at a shop counter. Mr. Slade come to see us about a school. He did. And you said no. I did. He thought about it, sitting on the stool with his boots not reaching the floor. Was it a good school? It was a very good school, Nora said. And I'd have had to say a thing wasn't true to get you into it. Then you'd have had a good school and a mother that lies, and I'd not have known how to be in the room with you. Tobias took that in the way children take things, which is completely and without comment, and asked whether there was any of the bacon left. She was awake a long time that night. She was not certain she had been right. She was never afterwards entirely certain either. The winter of 1867 was the worst money she ever had. Nobody sinks between November and March. The ground is wet, the water is up, and a farmer who wants a well wants it in June, when he has had a fright about his ditch. She had £1 at the end of October and 7 shillings at Christmas. In January she did a thing she had said she would not do. She sold 3 of the 6 lengths of her father's rods to a man at Shepton for £1.12. She kept the auger and the brace and the top 3 lengths. With 3 lengths she could still bore 20 feet. And 20 feet was enough to know something. That was the January the sinking started on barrow ground. She heard the gin horse before she saw anything, on the 18th of January, going round and round on the hill above her in a hard frost. Barrow ground was Slade's to let, and the syndicate had taken it. By the end of the week there were 8 men on it. A horse gin, a hut, and a mound of spoil growing beside the collar that Nora could see from her own door. She walked up on the Sunday when there was nobody there, and looked at the spoil the way that had cost her 4 days at Ranscombe. Head. Rubbly lias. Then rock. Then on the fresh side of the heap where the last week's work lay, a hard blue-gray marl that broke with a smooth face and went to paste between finger and thumb. She went home and took the stopper out of Suki Pring's bottle. She put a little of the 1,841 spoil on a saucer, beside a little of what she had carried down the hill in her handkerchief. They were the same. Not similar. The same. She sat with the two heaps in front of her, and understood, with no pleasure at all, exactly what was going to happen to her. It happened on the 11th of February. Tobias came in at 7 in the morning and said the water had gone funny. The plunge was thick. Not dirty. Thick. The color of milk gone off. With a smell of turned earth. By the afternoon it was moving, which it had never done in 15 months, and the nail scratch was 2 inches under. On the 12th it dropped 4 inches. On the 13th, 11. On the 16th of February, 1,868. Nora Bligh went down the stone stair with a lantern and stood on a slabbed floor no living person had seen. In front of her was a stone curb and a round hole 4 feet across. There was no water in it at all. She had wanted for 15 months to see what was under that plunge. She looked at it for about a minute. Then she sat down on the bottom stair, in the mud, and put her face in her hands. She had £2.4 in the tin. The £11 was due at Lady Day, and there was now nothing on the property that anybody would pay a farthing for. The parish took it as a judgment. Amos Purnell said in the Ring o' Bells that the Pring's water had come back for the Pring's reason. He said there was a woman in that house doing the same as the last one, and getting the same. 3 or 4 people repeated it. Tacey Hereford did not repeat it, and did not contradict it either. And Nora noticed both. Wilmot came up on the 20th. You'll want to be in that shaft. Now it's dry. I've £2.4. I know what you've got. He set his shovel against the wall. I'm not asking for wages. They went down on the 24th with the stove drawing and the canvas pipe down. They got another 6 feet of the choke out in 5 days, and on the 29th it fell on them. It was not a great fall. 2 barrow loads of loose stone that had sat on a shelf of clay since 1841, waiting for somebody to take the weight off the bottom of it. Wilmot was above her on the ladder and got clear. Nora did not. It came down across her right foot and pinned her against the steining with her leg turned, and the candle went out. Tobias was at the windlass, because his mother was 34 feet down a hole, and there was nobody else on the property. He was 9 years old, and Wilmot could not both hold the rope and get her free. He held it a little over half an hour. He never made a noise about it afterwards, and he never let anybody make a noise about it in front of him. He said, later, that the worst part was the talking. She kept it up from the bottom of the hole in a very steady voice, and he could tell she was making the voice on purpose. They got her up at 4 in the afternoon. 2 bones in the foot and a knee that swelled to the size of a loaf. Nothing worse, which everybody agreed was a great deal of luck, and Nora did not feel lucky for about a fortnight. She could not walk until the middle of April. The vestry sat on the 14th of March. She owed £11 and 2 years' interest, and had paid nothing. Slade did not attend and did not have to. He had bought the debt off the township in January at face. The vestry was delighted, because a debt owed to Mr. Slade is money, and a debt owed by Mrs. Bligh is a column. The order was made on the 28th. The old cold bath and its ground to be sold within 60 days in satisfaction. Nora sat in a chair by the stove with her foot up on a box, and a boy of 9 brought her things she could perfectly well have reached. She had been right about every part of it, and it had bought her nothing at all. She took the date panel out on the 9th of April, sitting on a plank on trestles, because it was the only work left in the world she could do with a broken foot. She had been looking at that stone for 17 months. Her father's voice about it had never gone away. A stone over a door is the last thing a man does. Set it true, or don't set it. Alias Pring had steined 20 feet of shaft. So true, she could not find a joint out of line in it. That man had not set his own date panel half an inch out of level. Somebody else had put it back. Wilmot raked the joint, and she went round it with a chisel from the plank. At the third side, the panel came forward on its bed, and behind it there was a cavity, dry as a bone, 11 inches deep. There was an oak box in it with a brass hasp and no lock, and she understood, sitting on the plank with her hand in the cavity, that no enemy had reset that panel. Suki Pring had taken it out herself in November of 1841, with the sessions 3 weeks off, and had put it back the only way a woman alone on a ladder in the dark can put back a stone. She would not open it there. She sent Tobias for Job Yandel and Tacey Hereford, and Wilmot for Mr. Say Denning, the solicitor at Wells, and sat on the plank with the box on her knees for 4 hours until they came. She had learned enough from Suki Pring to know that a thing found by one woman alone is not a thing that has been found. Denning opened it on the table with everybody standing round. The first paper was the counterpart of an indenture of the 2nd of May, 1801. The subscribers of Nether Tallow had bought of Sir Peter Coker a parcel of ground with the spring rising in it, built on it a bathhouse, a pump house, and a sinking, and settled the whole on trustees. There was a plan on skin. The shaft was on it, and a gallery running north from the bottom of the shaft into the hill for 61 feet to the spring head. 61 feet. Nora had cleared 34. There was a covenant that the water be free to the poor of the parish on 2 days in the week forever. The second paper was a deed of abandonment, dated the 9th of November, 1841. It recited that the spring at Nether Tallow having wholly failed, and the works being of no value, the trustees conveyed the same to Jarvis Slade, agent, for £15. The third thing in the box was not a deed. It was a bound book, quarto, 3/4 full, in a small upright hand. The first entry was dated 1802, and the last the 4th of November, 1841. Elias Pring had kept the yield of that spring every week for 34 years. Gallons in the hour over the sill, with the temperature and the weather. His daughter carried it on for 5 more. 60 degrees. Every entry, every season, 39 years. 60 in August and 60 in February. That was why the parish had called it the Old Cold Bath. It was also why a woman who put her boot in it 1 November had thought of July. The last 9 pages were Suki Pring's, and they were not a yield book anymore. The 22nd of May, 1841, sinking begun on barrow ground at the head of the combe, on the line of my father's gallery, and I have told Mr. Slade so. The 3rd of June, went up by night and took spoil at their 58 feet, blue marl, which lies nowhere under this ground. Have bottled it and set it in the Steining at 28, and written this, the 19th of June, our water thick. The 1st of July, our water gone. The 4th of November, they have found a lime barrel in my shaft. I did not put it there, and I know within one man who did. I shall say so at sessions, and nobody will believe me. I have put this where a sinker will look. Denning read that last line out and took his spectacles off. Where a sinker will look, he said. Not where a lawyer will look. No, said Nora. Mrs. Bligh, may I ask what made you take that stone out? It was 1/2 inch out of level. Denning wrote that down. She thought it odd at the time, and understood it perfectly well 8 weeks later. They sat in the bathhouse until dark, and it was Job Yandel who said the thing nobody else would. She were right. All of it. And I sat in the bells and let 'em say what they liked. Nobody answered him. Tacey Hereford came back next morning with a bag of flour she would not be paid for, which was as near as she ever got to saying it. Denning came out again on the 14th with the office copy of the sessions record. Susanna Pring, convicted the 7th of December, 1841, of unlawfully and maliciously fouling a well. 3 calendar months hard labor. Can it be undone? No. She is long dead, and there is no procedure on earth for it. It can be shown to be false in a room full of people, which is a different thing. And in my experience, it is the only thing available. And the sale? 60 days from the 28th of March. He put the papers back. The 1,801 deed gives you a great deal. The abandonment is a purchase from trustees who were told the spring had failed. To set it aside, I must prove they were deceived. And the man who deceived them has been dead 19 years. His son has his letter books. His son will not lend them to me. Nora sat with her foot on the box and looked at the plan of a gallery she had never seen. Then we don't want his books, she said. We want him to do it again. The barrow ground sinking failed in April, and everybody in the valley knew it within a day, because 8 men came off it and stood about in the lane. They had struck water at 62 feet in February and had lost most of it again by the end of March. Whatever they had cut into ran fast after rain and thin in a dry week, and came up the color of the field. A paper mill can no more use that than it can use cider. The syndicate's engineer was a Bristol man named Holcombe. On the 21st of April, he pegged out a second, sinking at Cutcombe Batch, 400 yards further along the hill. Nora went up and looked at his peg on the 23rd. On a stick, with her foot strapped. Then she went home and wrote for 2 days. What she wrote came to 3 pages. The strata under Cutcombe Batch, foot by foot, out of her own 3 borings, and Ranscombe and the barrow ground heap. The depth at which they would meet the blue marl, the depth at which they would come through it, and what would happen at Nether Tallow when they did. She wrote that they would strike between 59 and 64 feet. She wrote that within 48 hours of striking, the plunge chamber at the old cold bath would run, and would run thick. She wrote that the mud in it would be blue marl of the same character as the spoil taken from barrow ground on the 3rd of June, 1,841, now in her possession in a stoppered bottle. She wrote that after between 6 and 12 days it would stop. Denning read it, made her take out 2 adjectives, and put it in an envelope. On the 28th of April, they walked into the vestry at Tallow Bridge and lodged it sealed with the clerk. Job Yandel, Tacey Hereford, and Wilmot Chedzoy signed across the flap. Denning wrote in the minute book what had been lodged and by whom, and that it was not to be opened save in the presence of a magistrate. Amos Purnell was there as sexton and in his own capacity as himself, and said out loud that it was a piece of theatre. "It is," said Denning. "That is what evidence is, Mr. Purnell, when the man who did it is dead." Holcombe's men broke ground at Cutcombe Batch on the 4th of May. They struck at 61 feet on the 19th. The plunge at the old cold bath ran on the afternoon of the 20th. Nora was at the top of the stair when it started, and did not go down. She sent Tobias for the clerk, and Wilmot for Denning. And she stood there, and let it happen without her. It ran thick and blue-gray for 9 days, and then it stopped. The envelope was opened on the 22nd of May in the vestry room, in front of Sir Henry Coker. 2 churchwardens, Mr. Holcombe, Cuthbert Slade, and as many of the parish as could be, got through the door. Denning read the 3 pages out. Then Holcombe was asked at what depth he had struck. 61 feet. And the date? The 19th. Then he stopped, because he had worked out what he was being used for and did not care for it. They all walked down to Nether Tallow and looked at the plunge, and a man went in with a bucket and brought up mud. It was set on a board beside the saucer from Suki Pring's bottle and beside a handful off the barrow ground heap. Holcombe went along the 3 of them with his thumb and did the thing Nora had done in her kitchen in January. "That is 1 stratum," he said. "I would say so anywhere. And it does not occur under this building," said Denning. "By her borings it does not. I should want to bore it myself." "Bore it," said Nora. He bored it in June at his own charge, 3 holes, and it did not occur. The rest took until the following spring, and was slow and unexciting and mostly Denning. The 1,841 abandonment was set aside in Chancery. the trustees having been induced to convey by a representation that the spring had wholly failed, when the man making it had procured the failure. The 1,801 deeds stood. The spring, shaft, gallery, and works passed with the bathhouse, and the covenant for the poor with them. Cuthbert Slade was not prosecuted. He had cut nothing and forged nothing. He had been 22 years old in 1841 and had inherited a set of papers and a piece of knowledge, and had spent a career being reasonable with both. What happened to him was that Sir Henry Coker declined to renew his agency. Then 2 other estates declined. A land agent who is not trusted is not anything. He came out to Nether Tallow once more, in November 1869, and stood at the gate, and did not come up. "You were in that vestry with 2 papers," he said, "and I told you which was sensible." "You did. I have thought about it a good deal." He had his hat in his hand, which she had never seen. "I would say it again. That is the part I cannot get round." Then he put his hat on and went down the lane. Nora watched him go, and found she had nothing at all to say to him, which surprised her, because she had been composing it for 3 years. The gallery was cleared in the spring of 1,870 by 6 men in 11 weeks, and Nora paid for it out of the mill. That was Denning's doing, and she fought him about it for a month. The syndicate still wanted its water. It had a mill 3/4 built at Tallow Bridge and 2 failed sinkings on the hill. The only constant supply in the valley came out of a hole that now indisputably belonged to a widow with a limp. They offered to buy it again. She would not sell it, and never has. What she sold was the water, on a covenant, for 21 years. So many thousand gallons in the day, drawn above the sill, with the parishes 2 days a week untouched. There is a clause that the mill maintain the gallery and the shaft head at its own charge, to the satisfaction of a sinker named in the agreement. The sinker named in the agreement is a Nora Bligh. It brings in £38 a year. It is the same money every quarter, which she had never had in her life. And the first thing she did with it was pay Wilmot Chedzoy for 5 months he had never asked for. The mill was finished in 1871 and takes 40 men and 11 women. Job Yandell lived to see it and said it was too big and too loud and that the withy trade was finished. He was right about the withy trade. The old cold bath opened again in June 1870. 2 pence and a towel, 2 days free by covenant, and Tacy Hereford keeps it. She gave up the shop to do it, which nobody in that parish has got over. Nora sinks wells. She sank 9 in the first year after the gallery was opened, and she has never been short of work since. A woman who tells a room in April what a hole is going to do in May does not have to advertise. She bought her father's 3 rod lengths back off the man at Shepton for £2. That was more than she sold them for. She paid it without a word, because she wanted the same iron. Wilmot turns the brace. Tobias reads the spoil. He is 12. He lays it out on a plank in the order it came out, and he is better at the colors than she was at his age, and worse at admitting when he does not know. She has not put him to school at the mill, and she has not stopped him going there at 16 if he wants it. She said that to him once, plainly, and has not raised it since. Amos Purnell never came round. He said at the time that the mud proved nothing, except that there was a lot of mud. He says now that the Prings were an unlucky family, and there are 4 or 5 in Tallow Bridge who nod when he says it. Denning traced her in the end. Buried at Street Phillips in Bristol in 1852, out of a lodging house. Her trade given as laundress. The conviction stands. There is no way to lift it, and Denning never found one. What they could do, they did. In the September, the vestry entered a minute that the conviction of the 7th of December, 1841, had been obtained upon evidence now shown to be false. Sir Henry Coker signed it, and it was read aloud in the church. Nora had a stone cut and set into the front of the bathhouse under the date panel, which she reset true herself with a level on it. Level to a hair. Elias Pring had laid 20 feet of steining without a joint out of line, and his stone was going to sit straight over his door. The new stone says, E. Pring sunk this. Well, 1,801. S. Pring kept it, and was believed too late. Denning thought the last 4 words a mistake and said so twice. Nora left them in. The water came back into the plunge on the 29th of June, 1,870, at about 8 in the evening, when the last of the gallery was opened and the sill cleared. Everybody who had worked on it had gone home at 6. Nora had not told anybody it would be that night, because she was not sure. And after 3 years, she had got out of the habit of promising things. She sat on the bottom stair with a lantern. Tobias sat 2 stairs up. It came up the far side of the chamber first, out of the round hole and over the curb, with a sound like somebody pouring very slowly. Then it went along the north wall. Then it came round to the foot of the stair and covered the slabs and put itself out over the floor. The noise of it got softer as it got deeper, the way it does. It took about 4 hours. At about midnight, it stopped rising. Nora went down with the lantern and put her hand flat on the water. Then she reached up and felt along the wall for the nail scratch she had cut there in November 1866. The water stood at 4 feet and a hand's breadth. She kept her palm on the mark in the dark, and behind her on the stair the boy said, "Is that right?" "That's exactly right," said Nora. "Whoever built this knew what he was at."